Hey, welcome to CISO Tradecraft. You've heard about tactics, techniques, and procedures, and we usually think about them as technical ones. But hey, how about tactics, techniques, and procedures to create security champions? Sounds like an interesting idea. Stick around. We got a great episode for you coming right up. Hey, today's show, we're talking about programs to create security champions among developers. But here's an awesome tool that will help you leverage AI to detect security vulnerabilities in your software. ZeroPath is a SaaS tool that can help you secure JavaScript, Python, Go, Java, C#, and PHP. Their Wall of Fame lists the open source vulnerabilities they found already, and you can put the same world-class tool to work for you. Schedule a personalized demo today at zeropath.com. Welcome to another episode of CISO Tradecraft, the podcast that provides you with the information, knowledge, and wisdom to be a more effective cybersecurity leader. My name is G. Mark Hardy, and I'm your host for today. And I have a special guest today, Dustin Lehr, who's going to talk about tactics, techniques, and procedures to protect against, bad actors and application security. Hey, welcome to the show.
Hey, it is fantastic to be here, and I'm excited to talk about my favorite subject here.
And I'm looking forward to talking to you too, but before we go, really quickly, time's running out. CruiseCon, it starts on the 8th of February, ends on the 13th of February, and it'll be out of Port Canaveral, Florida. Come on out to see with a number of other CISOs, get a chance to do some networking, maybe work on your tan if you're from up north, although down here in Florida, it's still pretty cold, and give you an opportunity to do a professional meeting and a really clever way of doing it. So if you're going to sign up, you can go to cruisecon.com, and we've got a special code for you, CISO Tradecraft 10, and I'll give you a discount on it. I'll be there. Admiral Mike Rogers will be there, and hopefully you'll be there. So anyway, Dustin, tell me a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah, happy to. So I was actually a software engineer. So I spent over a decade writing code. I was in industries such as retail. I worked on video games for a little bit, which is a little bit relevant to this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I worked in the DoD, and then I got into cybersecurity as a security architect. So I have kind of a very technical background.
You can't hold down a job, right? Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, but I got pretty quickly into leadership, actually. So I joined cybersecurity, and then within the course of months, they actually asked me to lead the AppSec program. This was back at Staples. So got the opportunity to go right into leadership and then, learn kind of on the fly, like from the, frying pan into the fire, essentially, about what it takes to be successful when it comes to rolling out AppSec programs in general. So did that for about 3 years. And then I went to Fivetran, essentially as the first AppSec hire there, to do the same, right? Build and scale an AppSec program.
As an old Fortran programmer, I love the name.
It's based on that. Yes, exactly. It's based on Fortran. A lot of people have questions about that. So that's where the name comes from.
If you know what F8.3 means, you could look it up. And
yeah, there you go. So basically scaled an AppSec program there as well, got up to a deputy CISO position. So sort of,
well done.
Acquired additional responsibilities such as security awareness, cloud security, and so forth. And then most recently, I took a little bit of time to focus on a business that I'd been creating for about 3 years that focuses on security champions. So very much familiar with this champion concept. I think there's a lot of challenges and so forth that people run into. So I'm really excited to talk about this particular topic today.
And I'd love to get into it. And you had mentioned something early on about a leadership role. And I think it's really important. I try to differentiate on the show when I talk about jobs. From your perspective, what's the difference between leadership and management?
Oh boy. Well, I think a big thing to note here is you don't have to be a leader by title to be a leader. I think leaders pursue something they care about, and they are able to inspire folks to get on board and follow this idea. Again, this can emerge from an IC role in a company where they identify an opportunity, they start to, organize an effort around it to address it. Other people start to follow. They inspire that, right? So I think that I think leadership centers around that concept. To be a true leader, you're forging essentially the way for others to also follow and get involved.
And I
Um,
think key to what you're saying is it's not always in the job description.
exactly. Yeah. And you don't need the title to do it. And I think this is a very important thing for folks to get excited about. And that's that they can be a leader no matter where they are. I think some folks feel maybe they don't have the title or the position or whatever it is. I'm not in management, so I can't necessarily lead things. And I don't think that's true. I think you should feel comfortable to start a movement if you see an opportunity at your company or wherever. This could be out in the rest of the world too. If you see something, in your community, as an example, where you can lead a change, you don't have to have an official position to pursue something like that.
And I concur with you. I think that when we look at the challenge of leadership, a lot of that has to do, and I say it's probably not even in the job description, if not even a title, but developing your people, not taking care of
Exactly.
them, not protecting them or whatever, but developing them, bring them to the next level, help them
Hmm.
understand that they too can go ahead and can accept responsibility for uh, being able to move the ball forward with other people and inspire them to go ahead and do that. So I love that. And I think that's great, which really kind of dovetails into your comment earlier, which is said for the listeners who didn't catch it, Dustin's an expert in building security champion programs. I think you've even spoken about that at RSA. Now, sometimes security champions be called security evangelists and things, but it's someone from the dev team that's going to focus on cybersecurity. So, Dustin, what's been your previous experiences? Why would a developer even want to become a security champion?
Yeah. And frankly, this whole champion model is based on the concept of leadership too, because I think a big piece of what you're trying to accomplish when you're rolling out a solid security program is you're trying to induce culture change across your company. And you have to inspire folks to do that in the same way we were just talking about in terms of leadership. I see the security champions that emerge at your company to get involved with the change that you're trying to make as those sort of early followers that get involved and become leaders themselves. So kind of to your point, as a good leader, how do you empower folks, to do more when it comes to that stuff? And that's exactly what the champion model is built for. Why would a developer want to get involved? I think there's a few reasons. We were just talking about this concept of getting early adopters or early allies involved across your company in the change you're trying to make. And I think there's an attraction, for certain folks to that type of thing. As an example, like maybe you come into a company, you're like, hey, there's a few opportunities we have here. Why don't we do more of this? Better security best practices, better development
Mhm.
best practices. What happens is there will be certain people who emerge as believers in that. Okay. There will be other people that say, we don't have time for that. Leave me alone.
Mhm.
I have other things to do. But you will have people who say, I really believe in that. I've been trying to tell them to do this or something like that, right? Those are the beginnings of your champion program. So I think, very specifically to address your question, why would a developer do that? These are the developers who want to see change. They want to see better, higher quality software, engineering practices. They want to see something different. And you're giving them the opportunity to get involved to make that difference.
Got it. Yeah, because you've got everything from people who say, hey, I absolutely want to do the best I can to make sure my application, the code that I write is totally secure. You got great code. And other people are like, yeah, what the heck happens? Let the world poke at it. If it blows up, well, maybe we'll deal with it in version 1.1 or version 2 or whatever. So there's a whole range of attitudes. And obviously the people who embrace security that have some sort of a personal desire to say, hey, I get this. And in fact, I don't think anybody wants to use, let alone pay for an application that is known to be insecure. Why would I do that? It's like, hey, we have this great wallet, but it's got a hole in the bottom and your money will fall out of it from time to time. But if you don't care, it's a great deal. So from that perspective, we can understand that it really helps out all the other developers at the extreme level. I'll keep a job because your company's not going to go out of business because it screwed up a whole lot. But what are some of the common responsibilities that you'd assign to a security champion that they would do, perhaps even in addition to their normal dev tasks?
Yeah. And, I think this is important because I think that champions, developers specifically, can contribute uniquely to what you're building on your security program. They've got knowledge, they've got know-how, and they understand, the code base, they understand nuances about the environment, the product, and so forth, that the security team doesn't necessarily have visibility or privy into. And that's where I think champions can contribute the most. Like, how do we essentially combine the knowledge of the security team with the knowledge of the developers, right, to make it better for everyone? So when I think about a champion model, I think this is really important. It's not about passing the responsibility of security to the dev team. It shouldn't be about that. And frankly, any model that sort of has that as its paradigm, I think, is doomed to fail, because developers are busy enough. They have enough to think about, and they don't necessarily have the expertise that the security team does to do their job, right? However, there are certain things that I think champions can contribute very well to. So let's take the topic of like threat modeling as an example. My favorite part of these threat modeling types of exercises is the fact that you bring together knowledge from various stakeholders, various concerns, right? And you do that so that everyone can sort of talk about the system that you're threat modeling from their different viewpoints, security being one, but also like involving product people as an example to start talking about their perspective when it comes to the product. Just makes everyone better overall, right? So think about it like this. Security team gets involved to help with the threat modeling activity. They're going to bring a perspective that has to do with security best practices and active threats that might exist and so forth based on everything they focus on. Developers bring more of that perspective of here's why we built it, here's how we built it, and maybe insights into where the bodies are buried and some of these secret things that no one would really know about. And it's really the combination of that knowledge that I think gives you sort of that maximized view and maximized effort when it comes to an effective threat model. So just some thoughts there.
Yeah, that makes good sense because from a security perspective, if you think about it, if I'm not a developer, if I've been looking to check something, what does it look like? This black box, right? There's a bunch of code in here. What is it? Well, you don't know what the code is in there because you're not the developer. You don't have the source. So you can look at the gazintas and the gazautas, and you can change the inputs to see what time of outputs, and then you can infer whether or not this thing is doing what it's supposed to do. But any type of testing like that, you miss the opportunity for something like a SAST, or you could do a DAST, but the static application testing, you can't look at the code unless you've got access to it. And by having that security champion in your dev team can help, hey, these security people aren't here to screw things up. They're not here to slow down your release schedule. They're not here to mess with you or put you on report. They're here to help us build a better product. And during building a better product, if there's knowledge transfer that's involved, it's not just a matter of printing out a report and throwing it over the cubicle wall and say, yep, here's your findings, go fix them. But it's to sit down and be able that information exchange. By having a security champion, you've got somebody who's sitting on the same side of the table as the rest of the developers who, I get it. But then if they turn to him, they said, well, here, let me explain a little bit more, because sometimes there's always a little bit of a communications gap when somebody's speaking security, somebody's speaking applications and things such as that. And they don't always accumulate across. Because, for example, if you take a task like threat modeling and you do that, some of the key questions you'll ask from a threat modeling manifesto perspective. Well, what are we working on? What can go wrong? What are we going to do about it? And did we do a good enough job about it? And if you ask these types of questions, you have better software, because you can look at things like the confidentiality, the integrity, the availability. What could go wrong? What can we do about it? And if you start asking the right questions, well, where could this application go wrong? How could somebody put something in this input field that actually does something we don't want it to? Buffer overflow, or doing a SQL injection, or all the other stuff like that. Now you start asking those questions, and now you can avoid preventable failures, because you're starting to bake these things in, not just in terms of standards, which somebody may or may not follow, but the thought process. And as I say, I used to be a developer, and I would think about things like that. You always sanitize your input, and I wouldn't think of doing anything else. They'll be like, open your mouth and close your eyes. I have some input for you. Here's a surprise. No, you're not going to do that. But if you're new at it, you might not. So any other experiences you might have seen where you really justify the cost of this type of a program?
I mean, certainly. So I think one of the things to really think about that you touched on very briefly, but we should probably dive into a little bit more, is that people are more likely to listen to their peers talk about security than to the security team talk about security. And I think this is general human behavior. Like, think about if there's a new product or something that comes onto the market, it's advertised and the company loves their own product, so they're talking about the product and so forth. But are you really going to buy based on that? Or are you more likely to buy because your friend told you that they bought the product and they believe in the product
Mhm.
and they're excited about the product? Okay, well, now I'm going to check it out. I think it's the exact same concept here, where, the security team has certain, best practices or ideas or so forth that they're trying to share. And it's not, the developers who will necessarily buy into that concept unless they start to hear it from their peers and they start to hear that from the champions. Um, so when we talk about the benefit of these programs, if you've got an awareness program, if you've got a regular newsletter or announcements, et cetera, that you're trying to share information across your organization through, what's more effective, in my view, is to find these allies and these champions and have the message go through them.
Mhm.
For the exact reason that I was just saying, because people are going to ignore the bulletins and the emails and whatever. Like, the security team is supposed to talk about security, that's expected. Like, I can just put you in a box and basically ignore you, as opposed to my friend is telling me that this is important.
Mhm.
So I think that's important. And I think that's when it comes down to like this culture change concept. And I don't know that enough folks are thinking about what we're doing from a cybersecurity lens in
Mhm.
terms of change. But I would encourage us to really think about that. Are we showing up to kind of check the compliance box, or are we showing up to really make a difference in our organizations, which to me means change and all the things that go along with that.
Mhm.
So
Now, if you embrace that, it seems like someone says, okay, I'll press the I believe button. I like this. But how do you get started? Is it just a matter of anybody want to be a champion? Bueller, or is there a better strategy than that?
yeah, and this goes way into some of the behavioral science concepts that I have spent a lot of time with
Mhm.
now, which is interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because I was a tech person, I was like, total code nerd, and shifted very much over time to really starting to learn more about what makes humans tick, what makes humans work, how do you influence people, and so forth. So yeah, some, during a stand-up, all company, all hands, if you're like, does anybody want to be a champion? Raise your hand. Uh, that doesn't work.
Mhm.
Okay. But something more like, hey, I noticed your behavior is already showing me that you're aware of cybersecurity best practices. That's awesome. I'm going to call you out specifically as someone who might be interested in getting involved in a program like
Mhm.
this because of what you've already been doing.
Yeah.
How could someone say no to that, essentially, right? So, and it goes back to what we were saying before in terms of finding allies. I think as you're going out and building relationships with your organization, certain people are going to emerge as believing in what you're talking about. That's a good time to invite them in specifically, individually, point to point,
Mhm.
because again, it means a lot. The other method that I've used to recruit is having folks manager recommend them as well. So, you know, more of an official program, I think, takes a lot of leadership support and a lot of leadership communication. So as you're out there talking to leadership and getting them involved in all of this stuff, starting to ask them questions about, well, who do you think would be good for this program? uh, Works as well, because what they'll do is, they basically endorse somebody, right? They say this person would be good. You go to that person, you say your manager thought that you would be good for this. That's huge too. It's not, hey, I'm a random person who's just going to ask if you want to get involved. It's,
Mhm.
I talked to your management about this. They thought that you would be a really good candidate. Now, another couple of thoughts about how to roll a program like this out. I think there's kind of two ways to think about it. There's the grassroots way, and then there's more of the top-down, big bang official program way. I think either of them can work. I think eventually you can build yourself into more of an official sort of top-down leadership supported uh, program. But if you have to start with more grassroots because maybe leadership is skeptical, I've run into this a lot, even CISOs who are like, I'm not sure this is going to work. You go, okay, that's fine. And then you go start talking to people and you start through leadership, you start a movement. And now you've got 20 people who want to get more involved. And you go back to your CISO and you say, I've got 20 people here who are interested in getting more involved in cybersecurity. What do we do with them? Is it time to start more of an official program, et cetera? So just some thoughts there as well.
Some good ideas. Yeah, and I think one of the items that came out of Dale Carnegie, we talked about how to win friends and influence people, is give somebody a fine reputation to live up to. And you touched on that. You come up to me and says, hey, Dustin, I hear that you're one of the best developers that we've got at this place. And one of the things that's part of that development excellence is making sure that your code works and it runs right. We agree, right? I mean, this is why you're so good is you don't write lousy code. Well, one of the best ways to improve, make your code even more bulletproof, like, whatever it is, align with it, make sure is that a trigger word for them, is getting some cybersecurity and helping your team is awesome because now you're going to be perceived as a leader and people want to know, hey, how do you do what you do? Well, you can help them this way. And so whatever it happens to be, we're not really into manipulation. It's if you view that as a negative side, but influence. And if you've ever read Dr. Robert Cialdini's book on influence and the power of persuasion, we all know that there's a lot of ways that people will want to come and do things. Now, if you're building one of these programs, you want to do it right. And therefore, just going around and recruiting people a little bit like you're walking around and say, follow me, drop your nets and follow me, is to be able to say, hey, we've actually got some template or something we can aim for. Is there anything out there? Is there some sort of a standard or a template or whatever that people could look to and go like, wow, this gets me going?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of resources out there that you can find to help you find your way when it comes to why you should build security champion programs. Folks like even AWS have written articles on, how they've been able to create success with these types of programs. So there's a lot of resources out there. I created a resource as well. There's a
Sure.
website. Let's see if I may share.
Absolutely.
It's called the Security Champion Program Success Guide. And the reason I wrote it is because I really wanted to describe the process for building a successful program.
Mm-hmm.
So this goes way beyond just why and more into how, because I think that's the next step is like, well, how do I get started? What do I do? And it's written a lot more in terms of a process that you can go through or you should go through, as opposed to just prescribing a program. Because the thing is with these champion programs is every culture is different and certain things that will work for one company may not work for another. So you can't just take a program from this company and drop the exact same design into another. You have to step back. You have to think about what are we trying to accomplish? Who is our audience? This is sort of the structure of the guide. Who's the audience? What's the current setting as well? Like, what is the culture like today? What's incentivizing folks? How do they act when it comes to security and so forth? And then getting crisp on, well, what are the responsibilities of the champions? What do we want to see them do and so forth? And then from there, after you've built that foundation of knowledge, how do we design a program that's going to be tailored, right, for all the stuff that you discovered there? And then how to measure that, how to measure success and everything is all part of that guide. So I tried to take everything, all the mistakes that I've learned and, kind of share potholes and potential pitfalls and so forth that you might run into to kind of guide your way. So would definitely recommend checking that out.
Yeah, I've got the website up right in front of me here, and I'm looking at the different steps. You said make a procedure. You got vision, participants, setting, concept, design, delivery, and tuning. And we talked a little bit on the pre-show about gamification and stuff, but I want to move your stuff up like now because we could backfill some of the stuff on games and things like that, like cool books like this one here. But let's talk a little bit about the framework here. So if you start with a vision, and in my opinion, that's one of the most important things a leader has to have, a vision. You're setting a future direction, not only for yourself, but for your team. And so what would be good long-term goals for the program? How would somebody embrace this vision stuff once they get going for a security champion?
Absolutely. So one of my favorite parts about talking about the vision is it's an opportunity for you to kind of dream a little bit, like really think big and really think long-term. So when we think about developer champions, something like, well, as part of their regular habits when writing code, they're referencing standards and they are coding securely, essentially, because they have the knowledge, they have the sort of foundational knowledge to allow them to do that. So something like that, like create a North Star that seems almost unachievable, right? I think you need to be a little bit big in your thinking and have a BHAG, a big hairy audacious
goal. I remember the first time at business school, you told me about that was the funniest thing. I thought he made it up, and then I've heard it in a lot of other contexts as well.
Right.
But so we got the vision. Now the next one is the participants. Whom are we trying to reach? I mean, do you want everybody? Is it just make sense, or is it more specific than that when we're looking at building a security and champion program, not just the security champions, but the people whom they're trying to influence?
Yeah, let me go back super quickly to the vision because I think this is an important foundation, and that's going from that long-term vision to something that's more goal-oriented and specifically SMART goal-oriented, where there are actually specific, measurable, et cetera, goals.
Achievable, realistic, and time-based, yes.
Exactly. I don't know if you cheated and referenced something or if you had that memorized.
That stuff at stands. I also taught the BJ Fogg model, and which we might cover also. So all of a sudden I get a little flashback to all my years in front of a classroom.
Yeah, so I think that's important to get crisp on as well. What are the specific metrics you're trying to move with your program?
Got it.
And some of the, a lot of this comes from a lot of conversations I have with folks where they don't have this defined. So they're like, well, we have a champion program. It's not going very well. We're not really sure what to do about it. I'm like, well, what are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to do? And the answer's, we don't know. And I think, again, that's a big problem. So it's important to set all that stuff up front. And then to talk about participants, I think it depends on your goals. Like, this is why it's so important to talk about vision. Is this a developer-focused program? Is it more of an ambassador program that maybe has like a security awareness focus that's not necessarily focused on developers? It's focused on employees as a whole. So the point with this step is it's important to define that, who is the audience that you're trying to reach? And that varies from program to program, from company to company.
That makes sense. And I think it was a Chinese philosopher, Lao Tse, who said, without vision, the people perish. And so, again, back to your number one thing, and you'll find a lot of smart people going back thousands of years backing up on that. So you got vision and participants. The next thing in your framework is setting, your current environment. Tell me a little bit more about the setting. What are we talking about here?
Oh, we're going to get into depth here.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this to me is the
this
cool
is
stuff
great.
that you've written. I mean, I could cover BJ Fogg some other time, but.
So setting is about understanding your current environment, or setting, or context is another way to think about it, right? So you've identified what you want to accomplish. You've identified who you want to reach. Now let's talk about what motivates those folks. What types of behaviors are you seeing them do? Where do they put security in terms of their priorities? What's incentivizing them? What is leadership push in terms of the things that they think are important, and so on? I think it's really important to capture all of that, because everything else you design from there is going to have to take this into account, right? Is this a highly competitive, direct type environment? Is this more of a collaborative, maybe softer, respectful type of culture.
Mm-hmm.
Your entire design of your program is going to be based on knowing this stuff. Couple of thoughts here. You could use surveys also when it comes to learning about how people view security, as an example, and how close maybe people are to the goals that you want to hit. But be careful of surveys, because surveys won't tell you the whole picture either. It's important to combine surveys or people's response with their actual behavior. I can tell you that I think security is important. It's just that every chance I get, I do something else rather than security because I've got other pressures and so forth, right?
Mhm.
So it's important to kind of tease those things out. And then the other thing that I really like to do is I like to profile folks when it comes to motivation. And there is a framework, gamification framework, that I like to refer back to
Mhm.
ever since I found out about it. And it's called Octalysis. And it's essentially, it describes the 8 different core drives that humans have.
Mhm.
There was a fantastic book, Actionable Gamification, that I read some years ago now. It'd be great to share this with the audience.
Yeah, I'll put something
just
in the show
changed-
notes for you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. It just changed my entire approach because it helped me really understand what makes people tick, what actually motivates folks.
Mhm.
So as part of this setting phase, I like to create profiles that are based on the personas that we're trying to reach and what motivates them.
Mhm.
So as an example, a software engineer might be differently motivated than others across your environment. So how can you generally sort of capture what motivates software engineers and then tailor your program to them? So for example, over the years of doing this, I have found software engineers to be highly motivated by social aspects, which we can talk about in a minute, but also development and accomplishment. Okay.
Mhm.
That is to say, they like to see progress being made. And I can attest to this as a dev as
Yeah.
well, right? They like to see that their efforts are actually going somewhere. It's doing something for them. It's doing something for the company and so forth. And then socially, there's a little bit of a club when it comes to technical folks,
Mhm.
right? That you have to get yourself into. So what we were talking about before around being recognized as maybe a developer that stands out somehow, like, hey, you're a guru when it comes to this, maybe it's cybersecurity in this case, that would make a developer be motivated, right?
Mhm.
Now they stand out amongst their peers and so forth. So I know I'm talking about this a lot, but I get excited about all this. So designing a champion program that's, again, tailored for these motivators, specifically for your audience, I think is extremely important.
Yeah, and as a quick aside on the actionable gamification book we talked about, you said 8 different ideas that are in there: epic meaning, accomplishment, empowerment, ownership, social influence, scarcity, unpredictability, and avoidance. And so those are all kind of a games thing, and we can dive into that. But before we get into that, I really want to finish up your model. So we're going to go pop the stack a little bit here. We've got the vision, participants, and setting. And the fourth one in your model is a concept about how do we want people to behave. Tell me a little bit more about the concept idea.
Yeah. So this is where you really get crisp on what actions specifically do you want to see people take, which I think is important to define because it's like, okay, cool, we have champions. All right. What do they do? What do you want them to do? What are the specific responsibilities and so forth? So in this step, I like to encourage folks to really think about that. Just list them. And again, you can really think about this in terms of ideal situation.
Mhm.
I like to call them ideal actions because it's a little bit more of, what would a perfect champion do? They would show up to all of your events. They would speak up during your events. They would get involved in capture the flag things. They would report any security issues that they find. Here are the things that ideally we want to see them do. And I think, again, that's important to capture. The other thing in this step that I think is important, and this is why I mentioned goals before, is to tie these actions to goals.
Mm-hmm.
And I've found the exercise of listing the actions you want them to take and trying to figure out what goal they're associated with raises a lot of questions. Like you'll list some actions and then you'll realize, well, that's not aligned with any of our goals. Okay, well, you've got a couple options now. You either remove it and say that's not important, clearly, because we didn't set any goal against it, or maybe you missed a goal. Maybe there's this entire thought that you had in terms of what the champions should do that doesn't currently align with a goal. So you need to go create a goal for that. And you need to go figure out how you're going to measure success when it comes to that as well.
Right. So that's your concept. And next was design, though, about creating incentivization for the participants. Now, to a certain extent, we kind of a little bit earlier talked about the gamification, some characteristics. So if you build a good game, you're going to want to have people do these things. Does that tie into the design part here?
It very much does. And I think this is a good time to define gamification because I do think there's a lot of misunderstanding about exactly what that means. Okay. Gamification is not turning something into a game. Okay. I'll just say that clearly. What it is it's finding the techniques that work in games and applying them to real world situations. Okay. And this is important because here's the thing. People don't have to play games. Okay. It's completely optional, right? But we do anyway. And there's something about games that's motivating us to come back. And it centers around a lot of these 8 different core drives of motivation. And games have it down because, again, I have to go to work. You know, what motivates you to go to work? Well, I have to eat. Like, it's very simple. I need money. But I don't have to play that game. So why do I keep playing that? Why do I spend time doing that? So anyway, so what can we learn from the gamification world in terms of motivating folks so that we can apply it to the real world is a good way to think about gamification. The other concept that comes directly from the gamification world is this rewards.
All right.
A way to think about rewards that's beyond just material things. So I've got this on the Success Guide website. It's an acronym and it's SAPS, SAPS.
Okay.
And it stands for status, access, power, and stuff. And why I love this is because what it's trying to show is, you know, there are things beyond stuff that people care about. So let's look at status quickly. This is, you know, being recognized as someone who excels at a certain thing, et cetera, and you earn a certain status. So we've seen like belt level systems as an example for security champion programs. That's a status reward. I'm leveling up and I'm being recognized for that level up. Okay. Leveling up is a gamification concept, but here's a perfect example of using a game-like concept in the real world. When you get promoted at your company, what is actually encouraging, rewarding, et cetera, about that? Is it the extra paycheck? Or is it the status that comes from that? The recognition, the increase in responsibility, you know, the social aspects of your peers, et cetera, recognizing that, hey, you earned this, you worked hard, you deserve this, right? There's so much that comes with being promoted that's more of a status type of reward. And then access usually comes with a promotion as well, right? You get access to certain meetings, you get a seat at the table, right? With certain
the
leaders
executive
and so forth.
washroom with the nice thick toilet paper.
Exactly. And then power as well. You have more decision-making, authority, control, and so forth. That's also very rewarding. So now it comes to really talking about how do we, you know, take these concepts and apply them to champion programs. This is where in the design phase, I really like to talk about using these rewards effectively. So having a leveling system where people earn status, having rewards like access to tools or information, et cetera, that they didn't have access to before, but they earned their way into it. 2 examples. One of them is, you know, I found that a lot of folks are very intrigued by the potential breaches or incidents that have happened at a company, right? They're interested in that, but it's a little bit privileged information. Like the security team is not going to share all those details with the employees, right? However, what if you earn your way to that information, right? So you earn a certain status level as a champion, and now the security team is going to share a little bit more of that insight with you. Maybe not all of it, but more of it than you would have had before. Is that an incentive? Is that motivating for people to want to get involved in the program and level up? I think so.
Oh
And
yeah, finding that secret
I've
check
seen it work.
and opening it up and see what's inside there is it works. It's that gamification. So we're getting down to the last 5 minutes of the show. We've done vision, participant, setting, concept, design. What's next?
So this is where we talk about delivery, and we were talking about like grassroots versus big bang. It's good. I think it's good to talk about the best way to communicate, market, and roll out a program like this. Could be a phased approach. It could be a big bang like we talked about before. So that's the step where I like to encourage figuring that out. And then lastly is tuning. How are you going to measure the success of the program? What controls do you have in place and sort of dials that you can use to sort of adjust things as you go? I think the important concept here is you don't just like sail the ship off into the sea, right? Like, cool, we designed a champion program. All right, we launched it. We're all done now, right? No, it takes constant care and feeding, tuning, etc. So that's what that step is all about.
Interesting. So we've got kind of a quick review. Everybody, we got the vision, participants, setting, concept, design, delivery, and tuning. Now, in doing this with your application developers, is there any of these steps that tend to be the one that people struggle with about? And if so, what's kind of a good hint or methodology to help them get up over the hump?
I think the biggest piece there are two major pieces that come to mind that people struggle with. One is proving the value of the program to leadership. The second is motivating folks to continue to stay involved. And I try to address both of these in the guide. The leadership aspect by setting clear goals that you can measure, that you can show, right? Show small wins as you go, incremental wins, share stories, et cetera, as folks are getting involved. You know, hey, we wouldn't have even known about this security hole over here without a champion who reported it to us.
Right.
That's important stuff to share. So yeah, that's where I'd start.
Awesome. So in terms of resources out there, you'd mentioned the one site before, which I thought was great, and it is securitychampionsuccessguide.org. Make sure we get the right link there. And you've also got a website for your business, right? Catalyst, spelled KATILYST.com. Is that a kind of a little plug for you? Because you didn't have to do it. I did it for you.
Yeah, this was a company I created, like I mentioned at the beginning, years ago. And we focus on security champion programs and providing not just services like design to help you succeed, but we've also got a product that automates a lot of the gamified elements that we talked about today.
All right, excellent. So any closing thoughts, any way you can think of it? People say, hey, I like this idea. I really want to get started. We've given a couple links here, and we'll put them in the show notes so you don't have to check in your spelling and things like that. But how would you help people either convince their management or their boss or even themselves to get off a top dead center and start moving on something?
Yeah, I think it comes down to what we were talking about in terms of vision, like dream big. What does an ideal culture at your company look like when it comes to cybersecurity? Like for me, that's motivating, right?
Right.
I like the idea of, okay, here's something, a BHAG, right? It would be amazing if people would behave like this. Well, what if I told you that is possible? It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort and so forth, but we can move toward that. And I think that's exciting. So hopefully that's inspiring and motivating. The other thing to think about really is to get excited. Like if you're going to be successful in creating a program like this,
right?
Put your creativity into it to the point where you're excited about the whole thing.
Right.
Because if you're not excited, no one else is going to get excited. And it kind of goes back to leadership, like we were talking about before. How do you inspire others, by being skeptical or boring? That's not how to do it. So get excited and have fun.
Yeah, and I love the idea of gamification. I mean, here I am. Probably can't tell if the screen resolves. There we go. So there's my link. Or what am I doing? 500 days on doing my Duolingo. And he just hit that. So that's, again, you get in there and you create the streak, you create the continuity, you create the gamification, the incentive, and you find a way to do stuff. So Dustin, I think you've had some awesome ideas. Hey, anybody who's listening to the show, if you think you've loved this stuff, let us know. Pay it forward. Let other people know where you found the podcast, CISOTradecraft.com. Go to us on LinkedIn. If you're not following us on LinkedIn, please do so, because we put out a lot more than just podcasts. We also have a Substack newsletter with some good information that's out there. And we'd love to help you on your career journey in the cybersecurity world. So thank you very much for being part of our audience. Dustin, thank you for coming on board and joining us today. And for everybody else out there, till next time, this is your host, G. Mark Hardy. Stay safe out there.